Well, hello there, everybody. I hope that you all didn't forget me because I know it has been a while. But just in case you're new here or you forgot, my name is Brandon. This is Marotta Media, so welcome. If you guys have been following me for any amount of time, you will know that there have been times where I take very prolonged hiatuses from making YouTube videos. And the reason I do this is because I, just get busy or I haven't been seeing enough, but I am not kidding when I tell you, in between this video and my last video, I have been so unbelievably busy. With work and just being tired all the time. Yeah, it's been a struggle. But during that time, I did also get to experience something very cool, and that is what I'm going to be going over in this video today. I covered my very first film festival as a member of the press in September. I covered this year's Fantastic Fest, which is a film festival that is held in Austin, Texas. I did apply to go to the festival in person, but once it got closer, I realized that a lot of my online friends weren't going, and I wasn't sure if I could make it work with my work schedule, so I kind of deferred to covering it remotely. And I got approved for remote coverage anyway, and I think that was the best choice in this scenario. And even though I didn't get to go to the festival in person, this was still a very fun experience, and I'm so happy that I was able to do it. And I sent out so many emails to the list of contacts that I was given, asking them for screeners of movies that I was interested in after reading up on them. But alas, after being ignored by a lot of them, or just outright rejected by a lot of them as well, I was only able to get 5 screeners. And in this video, I'm going to go over the 5 movies that I was lucky enough to watch early at this year's Fantastic Fest. And I thought it was fitting because all of the movies I watched are horror or horror adjacent, and we're in the heart of October, spooky season. Halloween is just around the corner, so it seemed like the perfect time. So without further ado, let's get right into it with the first movie that I watched at Fantastic Fest this year. And that movie was the Australian film Beast of War. Beast of War tells the story of a bunch of Australian soldiers during World War II. And when their plane is shot down, they find themselves stranded in the middle of the ocean, and unbeknownst to them, there is a hungry shark in the waters that surround them. Beast of War intrigued me because movies with sharks always have the potential to be a lot of fun. I'm also a really big fan of war movies, and this movie seemed like a cool spin on the war genre. And I will say that Beast of War has a lot of really good things going for it, but this movie was just alright in the end. And this movie was also directed by Kaya Roach Turner, who also directed the movie Sting from last year about a giant spider in an apartment building. And that movie was just about the same as Beast of War. I thought it was decent, it was fun in parts, but it wasn't anything amazing. For starters, this movie has some surprisingly great acting performances, especially from the lead, Mark Cole-Smith, who plays a character by the name of Leo. I was very impressed with his performance and just every performance as a whole, if I'm being honest. I also found the character of Leo to be a really fascinating one, especially because he's really the only one who gets any sort of backstory. I was also really surprised with the quality of this movie. It looked really, really good. The cinematography was well done, and it was complemented well by some rather superb lighting. I will also praise any movie that is mostly or almost entirely isolated, meaning movies that take place in one central location. And that is the kind of movie the Beast of War is, because a majority of this movie takes place in the middle of the ocean. And movies like that really bring out the best in directors and show just how creative they can be. But easily the best thing about Beast of War is that this movie uses an actual, tangible animatronic shark. This movie could have easily cheaped out and used a CGI shark that looked just as bad as something that you would see on the Sci-Fi Channel. But it didn't, and I absolutely love that they didn't. It was obviously very reminiscent of something like Jaws. But the shark is also the biggest problem with this movie, and that is that the shark itself feels like it really isn't utilized as much as it should have been. The shark only appears every now and then, and it leads to some rather brutal scenes, but I really wish they used it more than they did. And as the movie goes on, it does become incredibly predictable as well. You know exactly how this movie is going to end as soon as it begins. And something else that really bothered me is that these men are out in the middle of the ocean. They don't have any food, they don't have any water, and they're obviously exhausted. But I feel like this movie didn't do a good job of selling the fatigue that these men are feeling being stranded in the middle of the ocean. Because they all look rather fine. They don't look like they're starving, like they're dying of thirst, or like they're on edge, hallucinating, really anything. In the end, Beast of War is a good movie. I did enjoy it, and I would recommend this movie to anybody who likes war movies or shark movies. Because when's the next time you're going to see a combination of those two genres? But I think that this movie could have been great, but unfortunately, I would say it's just fine. And overall, I would give Beast of War a 6 out of 10. Following that up was the Japanese horror film The Curse. In The Curse, we follow protagonist Riko, whose friend has recently committed suicide. And she committed suicide after witnessing a series of rather disturbing social media posts. And Riko is convinced that there is a lot more to this story than meets the eye, so she sets out to investigate the person behind these posts and why her friend took her own life. I was looking forward to watching The Curse because this movie was actually sent to me by the director, Kenichi Ugana, so big thank you to him. And I'm really doing my best to support foreign cinema because I've become a much bigger fan of movies that are not from my own country in recent years. And especially when it comes to horror, because I feel like horror varies depending on the country that it comes from. And The Curse is a movie that absolutely wears its inspirations on its sleeve, because there is a lot of remnants of movies like The Grudge or The Ring, but, you know, the Japanese versions of those movies because they were remade in America. But I really did not care for The Curse, and I'm very sad to say that because I was happy to support it. But you guys should know me by now. I pride myself on being as honest as I possibly can. I'm not going to sugarcoat my feelings. One of the many problems with The Curse is that I really did not think the acting in this film was very good. I'm not saying it was terrible. The best word I can use to describe it would be subpar. The story structure is also a little bit repetitive because we more or less see the same thing over and over again, especially at the beginning of the film. And I do also remember there were quite a few scenes that were very eerily silent. And I don't mean that in a good way, like it's meant to scare you or make you feel uneasy. It just felt like bad audio mixing, because so many scenes were just very quiet, and it didn't feel like they should have been. The entire production, I hate to say this, but it felt very amateurish. There's even a scene I remember vividly where one of the actors just straight up runs into the camera. And you can tell that this was not on purpose, and they probably thought it looked cool and they just decided to leave it in, and it looks really bad. And it all leads to an ending that I was liking at first, but then it really started to annoy me because one character basically tells you what the entire movie is about in the end. And I don't like when all the themes of a movie or what the movie is trying to say is basically spoon-fed to you because it doesn't believe that you're smart enough to figure it out on your own. There are a lot of good things about The Curse, like the practical effects, especially when it came to the blood. There's one particular scene where blood starts to just spew out of somebody, and I won't give anything away if you want to watch it, but it looked really, really good. And I do like that it tries to pay tribute to those other Japanese films and be like them, because it very much wears its inspirations on its sleeve. But the overall themes of this movie discuss the dangers of social media, and it adds a horror twist to it. It's a really good idea, and I like what the movie is trying to say about living vicariously through others and jealousy that your life isn't as exciting as them. You know, those people that constantly post about how awesome their life is, and you may not feel the same way about your life, and you're like, what am I doing wrong? That's precisely what The Curse does, but it does it with a horror twist, and it works really well on paper. The execution here just could have been a lot better. I'm not trying to sound cruel because there clearly was a lot of passion put into this project, but it just didn't work in a lot of ways for me. Overall, I'd give The Curse a 5 out of 10. After The Curse, I watched the Polish slasher film 13 Days Till Summer. In 13 Days Till Summer, we follow a brother and sister who are left alone in their high-tech home for the weekend when their father leaves on a business trip. So they decide to have a party and they invite a bunch of friends over. But unbeknownst to everyone else, an uninvited guest makes their way to the party and the night gets rather grisly from there. This is another movie that I was so excited to watch because I really do love slasher movies. My favorite horror franchise of all time is Scream. I mean, obviously, as you could tell. And 13 Days Till Summer had a lot of fantastic things going for it, but it also had a lot of things that absolutely derailed it. Much like the previous movies that I've mentioned in this video, 13 Days Till Summer is shot incredibly well. The cinematography in this movie is legitimately stunning in parts. The shot composition is phenomenal. And once again, the camera quality looks excellent, which is something that you don't really expect to see for independent films like this. One of the things I always say about a good slasher movie is that they need to have a good and memorable killer design, and 13 Days Till Summer absolutely has that. The killer in this movie has a mask that is nothing but a smiling face, and that face is also upside down. That's frightening. And I will say that the first third of this movie really had me intrigued to see where it was going, because like most slasher movies, this is a whodunit, and you're trying to figure out, okay, who could the killer be? And the movie tries to lay out all these clues for you. But the problem with 13 Days Till Summer is that it just takes way too long to get going. And that really is a problem, because this movie is only 80 minutes long, so it isn't long at all. Another thing that I always say makes a good slasher movie is the kills. The kills have to be memorable and something that you haven't really seen before. We don't get any of that in 13 Days Till Summer. This movie's kills are very underwhelming, and to tell you the truth, I don't really remember how anybody in this movie died because it was that forgettable. There's also a multitude of unexplored backstories, especially between the brother and sister, because there's clearly some odd sort of tension between them, especially when it comes to their mother. Because if I remember correctly, their mother left them, but you never really find out why. And this caused a rift between them, but that is also never explained. But without question, the biggest problem with 13 Days Till Summer is this movie's ending. Because without getting into spoilers, this movie has two endings. I will try my best not to spoil anything, but the first ending is basically where it should have ended, and even though it had a lot of loose ends that were not tied up, it would have been a better ending. But the movie goes on for about 5 more minutes or so, and I would say the second ending basically renders everything that we watched in this movie as completely pointless. I'm dead serious. The ending of this movie shocked me with how bad it was. It was one of those endings that really just made me shrug my shoulders and throw my hands up in confusion. Like, what the fuck did I just watch? It's such a shame because I really was looking forward to this movie, but it was just not that great. Overall, I'd give 13 Days Till Summer a 5 out of 10. The fourth movie that I watched at Fantastic Fest was called Dolly. In Dolly, we follow a young woman named Macy who is abducted by a huge hulking person that wears a porcelain doll mask. And this person wants to raise Macy as her new toy dolly. If that concept sounds twisted, that's because it is. This movie is messed up. This movie actually accomplished a pretty impossible feat when it comes to horror movies, for me at least. It actually disturbed me and made me feel a little bit squeamish. Dolly does an excellent job with its atmosphere. Everything just feels so eerie and unsettling. There's also a fair amount of body horror within Dolly, and the body horror is pretty well done. I won't get into spoilers, but there are scenes where body parts are literally removed from a person, and yeah, it's pretty gruesome. This movie also did a great job selling its atmosphere through the production design of the house that a majority of the film takes place in. Because this house is in the middle of the forest, and it's very old and run down. It looks abandoned, like nobody has lived there for years. But there's a really good contrast between the room that Macy basically finds herself in when she wakes up. The room that she finds herself in is something that looks like it was made up for a baby. The walls are pink, there's dolls everywhere, it's very clean, there's a crib in the center of it. And the rest of the house just looks absolutely run down. It hasn't been cleaned in forever. It's filthy. You'll probably get sick just by walking in there. But unfortunately, I didn't think Dolly was a great movie because a lot of things really bogged it down for me. And the first complaint I have is something that I know for a fact was absolutely intentional, but I just found it disturbing for the sake of being disturbing. And that being that this movie, the entire movie, feels like someone's really odd sexual fetish. I don't really know how to describe it, but all of it just felt so odd, and not in a good way. Because there have been movies that disturbed me, but in a good way, if that makes any sense. In this movie, I was just like, this is gross. I feel gross for watching this. It does also get very repetitive in the sense that Macy finds herself in the room, she tries to leave, and she gets caught, and Dolly throws her back into the room. That happens, I'm not kidding, maybe 3 or 4 times, and I'm like, alright, we get it. Can we move past this? It also tries to have a very deep theme about motherhood and the relationship between a mother and daughter, but it comes off as very hollow, like the movie itself doesn't really know how to convey its message. And this last thing is kind of a nitpick, but Dolly herself makes these incredibly annoying noises all throughout the movie. Because as I said, she's wearing a porcelain doll mask, and she breathes very heavily, so a majority of the movie you hear these muffled breathing sounds, and it sounds like she's having trouble breathing. And once again, it really is a shame because I was really liking what I was seeing in this movie for the most part, but the stuff that bothered me really weighed it down. Overall, I'd give Dolly a 6 out of 10. And here we are at the final film that I watched at Fantastic Fest. To finish off this year's festival, I watched the horror movie Apopheniacs. And I would categorize Apopheniacs as an anthology movie of sorts because it follows a bunch of different people through intertwining storylines. And the thing that brings all of these people together is that all of them are in some way affected by the use of a deep fake or an AI-generated video. And these videos cause their lives to spiral out of control with some pretty terrible consequences. I don't think I can overstate how much I love the concept for this movie. With the hot topic of today's world like AI and AI-generated imagery, it was only a matter of time before we got a movie like this. And this was without question my favorite movie that I watched at the film festival. Because as I said, this movie gets points from me just for its concept alone. AI videos scare the living hell out of me because anybody can create anything and they'll trick other people into believing that it's real. And for the most part, I think AI-generated videos are pretty easy to spot, but there are some that look so real and it looks like it could be legit. And this movie basically begs the question, what if you pissed off someone who had access to that sort of technology? Because the scenarios in this movie just basically consist of someone inconveniencing another person, and that person's like, alright, I'm gonna go out of my way to destroy you now. And they make a video of that person doing something absolutely heinous. That's just so goddamn scary, because you really never know what people are capable of, and it even says right on the poster, people are so easy to manipulate. People will believe what they want to believe, even if it isn't true. And all of the events in this movie lead to an absolutely insane third act. The final few minutes of Apopheniacs are some of the most fun that I've had watching a movie this year. It gets that nuts. I was seriously sitting there with my mouth agape because I could not believe what I was watching. It all just spirals out of control. It feels like this movie is just a tower of Jenga blocks that is ready to tip over at any time. But unfortunately, that third act comes to a very abrupt end. This movie just ends. It doesn't feel like it really has a proper resolution. And that's what made me realize that this movie is more or less an experiment than anything else. Because the story is pretty lacking in parts. Such as this movie having way too many characters, which leads to the script being a total mess. And there are times where the stories intertwine in ways that don't really work. Like, there are characters that we see from previous stories that appear in other character stories, but there isn't any real reason for them to be there. It feels like they were kind of just shoehorned in so you could be like, oh, that person's here now. This movie is also full of just absolutely cringeworthy, holier-than-thou dialogue. Seriously, the dialogue in this movie in parts is so bad, and it thinks that it's so much more profound and important than it really is. One scene in particular that takes place in a coffee shop, and a character is just ranting about the ridiculous nature of tip culture in the United States. And he's just rambling about how tips are stupid and you shouldn't have to be tipped for doing a very simple job. And I understand where he's coming from, I do, but it was just like, really, dude, just get your coffee and shut up. And it's dialogue like that that really bothers me, because it feels like the writer themselves is talking to us and just venting about something that bothers them. But nonetheless, I still had a really good time with Apopheniacs, and I'm really looking forward to other movies that discuss AI and make it horror related, because I feel like the possibilities are endless when you're talking about that topic. And overall, I would give Apopheniacs a 7 out of 10. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching my video discussing all of the movies that I watched at this year's Fantastic Fest. If you guys also covered the festival and you saw any of these movies, let me know what you thought about them. I would love to know. But if you guys like this video, be sure to hit that thumbs up and do not forget to subscribe. If you want to see my previous reviews, I will link those right over here. Other than that, I hope you all have a tremendous rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.